Not every war is loud. Some are silent. And some of the most dangerous losses a man will ever suffer won't come from defeat. They'll come from distraction, not destruction, but slow, constant misalignment. And when that misalignment comes in the form of comfort, validation, and emotional dependency, it becomes nearly impossible to see. Carl Jung warned that what we don't make conscious will control us. And in many men's lives, that control shows up in relationships that quietly erode purpose, not with shouting, not with violence, but with subtle redirections, with emotional pull, with soft manipulations that look like love, but function like chains. If this resonates, subscribe now and comment down below from where you are watching this and what this message stirs in you. Because this is more than content. It's a signal to those ready to take their purpose back. It starts small. A request to spend more time together. A comment about how your work is too intense. A slight withdrawal when you're fully in your zone. At first, you adjust. You compromise. You think it's balance. But over time, you stop moving at your pace. You stop making decisions from vision. You start making them from emotional management. You don't feel it right away. That's the danger. Because your purpose isn't ripped from you, it's diluted. And that dilution comes disguised as love, as connection. But if it requires you to forget your mission, it's not connection, it's a leash. Jung believed the psyche doesn't just crave comfort, it craves meaning. When a man loses his connection to purpose, he doesn't just become bored, he becomes lost, directionless, passive. And that's the beginning of the slow decline. Not because he's weak, but because he traded fire for peace. That's where we start, and we're just getting started. When a man steps into a relationship without clarity, he unknowingly signs an invisible contract. Not with ink, but with compromise. And the fine print says this: I will trade parts of my path for temporary peace. Most don't realize they're doing it until the cost shows up as regret. Carl Jung understood that every relationship is an exchange of energy. But if the exchange is one-sided, if one person grows while the other shrinks, it becomes parasitic. And this doesn't happen through domination. It happens through guilt, through subtle cues, through emotional consequences that are never directly spoken, but always deeply felt. It begins with language. You've changed. You're not like you used to be. You care more about your goals than us. These aren't just observations. They're pressure. They're warnings. Shrink back or lose the connection. And if a man hasn't anchored himself to his mission, he will fold. When a man folds, he doesn't notice right away. Because on the surface, things are calm. The relationship feels stable. But underneath, his spirit is restless. His creativity fades. His drive weakens. He becomes easier to manage, but harder to recognize. Jung would say this is the beginning of neurosis, not as illness, but as a split. A separation between who he is and who he's pretending to be to keep the emotional ecosystem balanced. The question isn't whether your partner supports you. The real question is, have you abandoned yourself just to keep things smooth? Purpose isn't lost overnight. It's not stolen in one dramatic moment. It's worn down slowly, gradually, like a river shaping stone, not with violence, but with consistency. And in many cases, it begins the moment a man starts seeking harmony over truth. Jung believed the soul doesn't tolerate lies for long, even if the lie brings short-term peace. So when a man begins to compromise his mission in favor of emotional comfort, the internal conflict doesn't disappear. It just goes underground. He may smile more, he may argue less, but something in him starts to go dark. He stops pursuing the difficult work. stops leaning into the uncomfortable growth. He starts optimizing for approval, for ease, for being easy to love. The man who once moved with sharpness now walks cautiously, asking permission with his presence. Not because she demanded it, but because he slowly taught himself to seek it. This erosion shows up in the smallest details. He starts saying maybe when he means no. He chooses silence when his instinct says speak. He shrinks not to survive, but to avoid tension. And as Jung would suggest, this tension doesn't dissolve. It gets absorbed into the unconscious, where it festers as quiet resentment. This is the phase where many men lose their edge, not from failure, but from slow surrender. They still look the same on the outside, but they've lost the inner clarity that once made them dangerous. And in that loss, they become not only less effective, but less themselves. Because the soul cannot thrive in submission to a lie. And pretending everything's fine is the biggest lie of all. One of the most deceptive forces a man faces is the illusion of emotional safety. It doesn't arrive with chaos. It arrives with calm, predictability, comfort, a sense of emotional relief that feels like support, but slowly begins to function like sedation. It's not a violent takeover. It's an invitation to softness, to sensitivity, to being more open. And while that can be healthy in the right container, in the wrong one, it becomes a tool for quiet control. When she says she wants you to be more vulnerable, more emotionally present, it sounds like growth. It sounds like love. And in some cases, it genuinely is. But in others, it's a setup, an unspoken agreement where you provide access in exchange for approval, where you trade edge for affection. Not because she's evil, not because she's calculated, but because your strength threatens the balance she's used to. Your autonomy unsettles her sense of closeness. Your mission reminds her she's not your only focus. And that's when it starts. At first, it's subtle. You start toning things down. You soften your words. You second-guess your instincts. You hold back your vision just enough to keep things smooth. You trade boldness for comfort. And slowly, the version of you she was drawn to starts to fade. Not because she demanded it, but because you interpreted her emotional cues as a sign to adjust. You begin editing your fire to maintain the peace. You cut yourself down in small, polite ways. You laugh at your ambition so she doesn't feel inferior. You act confused when you know exactly what you want, just to seem less intimidating. And every time you do this, you teach yourself that clarity is dangerous, that decisiveness is selfish, and that leadership makes you hard to love. Jung knew that when a man begins adapting his core to manage someone else's emotional landscape, he's not creating intimacy, he's dissolving himself. Because adaptation for survival isn't connection. It's a quiet form of self-abandonment. It feels noble. It looks like compromise. But what it creates is a version of you that's easier to control and harder to respect. Eventually, that self-betrayal leaks into everything. You lose your sharpness. You lose the ability to act without overthinking. You defer. You hesitate. You scan for her reaction before making a move. And you start believing that emotional safety means you must become emotionally predictable. But predictability that isn't peace. It's submission. You forget how to move without permission. You lose the memory of what it felt like to chase something without asking if it made someone else uncomfortable. Your mission gets slower, smaller, safer, and all of it happens in the name of being a good man. But Jung would argue, a good man isn't a tame one. A good man is a whole one who can feel, yes, but who never forgets how to move, how to act, how to live aligned even if it disrupts the mood in the room. The illusion of emotional safety isn't safety. It's stagnation. It's emotional codependency dressed up as connection. And no man was built to thrive in that kind of stillness. He was built to lead, to pursue, to risk, to rise. But first, he must remember what it feels like to move without asking for permission. And then do it again, and again, until movement becomes natural, and the illusion loses all its power. Not all submission looks like weakness. Sometimes it looks like loyalty. Sometimes it looks like love. But if you look closely, there's a war happening beneath the surface, a quiet battle between a man's need for peace and his need to remain who he is. Jung understood that the psyche is not interested in comfort. It's interested in integration. That means the parts of you that get silenced don't disappear. They fight back. And when you suppress your aggression, your drive, your clarity, those energies don't vanish. They turn inward. They become fatigue, doubt, resentment. They become the subtle sense that something's dying in you, even when everything looks fine. You become agreeable, not because you believe, but because you're exhausted. You say yes, but your body tightens. You stay, but your spirit leaves. And people praise your devotion, not realizing it's a mask for despair. That's the twisted reward of compliance. Applause from others and betrayal of self. The danger is that this war becomes normal. You forget what it feels like to act with full conviction. You forget what it means to be untamed, your edges dull. And the man who once moved with purpose now moves with caution, like he's asking the world for permission to be who he is. But here's the truth. Anything that requires the death of your fire is not love. It's control. Even if it's dressed in care, even if it's unconscious, because real connection doesn't ask you to become less. The war behind compliance is not between you and her. It's between the version of you that survives and the version of you that was born to lead. And only one of them gets to stay. Not every calm environment is healthy. Some are just silent because the man inside it has stopped speaking his truth. There's a kind of peace that looks beautiful from the outside, but is built on repression, on self-editing, on the slow killing of instinct. And that kind of peace always has a cost. Carl Jung spoke of the tension between the persona, the mask we show the world, and the shadow, the parts of ourselves we hide. In a relationship that quietly drains a man's purpose, that mask grows thicker. The man smiles, listens, nods. But beneath it, his shadow grows. Not as rage or violence, but as fatigue, confusion, lack of direction. He becomes agreeable, not because he agrees, but because resistance feels dangerous. Emotional withdrawal from his partner turns into emotional withdrawal from himself. He stops trusting his own gut. He second-guesses his goals. He trades confrontation for safety, not realizing that every time he avoids a hard truth, he's teaching himself to abandon who he is. What looks like peace is often just fear in disguise. Fear of loss, fear of emotional backlash, fear of being seen as difficult. So he plays along, he shrinks, he bends. Until eventually, he's not the man she admired. He's just the man who stays. And the irony is brutal. In trying to preserve the relationship, he destroys the very essence that made it worth having in the first place. This is the illusion of peace. It doesn't come from alignment. It comes from self-erasure. And what you erase to survive, you can never access to thrive. There's a line every man crosses when he's been bending too long. The moment he no longer trusts his own judgment. It doesn't come with alarms. It's subtle. A hesitation before speaking, a second guess before deciding. He starts looking outward for validation. Because somewhere along the way, he was trained to believe his inner voice was dangerous. Carl Jung warned that when a man loses connection with the self, he becomes fragmented. That fragmentation isn't chaos, it's obedience. Obedience to an emotional script he never agreed to, but keeps following because it keeps the surface calm. The problem? Calm isn't clarity. Peace isn't power. And harmony built on self-betrayal always leads to internal collapse. When a man doubts his own authority, he becomes manipulable, not through force, but through affection, through small emotional penalties, through the threat of withdrawal. He learns to adjust, not to what's right, but to what's rewarded. And soon, his compass isn't set by purpose. It's set by approval. This is where many men wake up years later wondering where their fire went, why they're exhausted, why nothing excites them. It's not burnout. It's the weight of all the times they ignored their own direction to make someone else feel safe. Jung would say the antidote isn't rebellion, it's reintegration. To gather the pieces that were sacrificed for acceptance. To rebuild the inner throne and sit back on it like it was never meant to be empty. Because it never was. At some point, a man begins to feel it, the pull back to his center. It doesn't come through inspiration. It comes through frustration, disillusionment, the quiet realization that something inside him is tired of pretending, that he's been living sideways, out of alignment. It's not a breakdown, it's a wake-up. Carl Jung wrote that the first step toward individuation, toward becoming whole, is recognizing the falseness of the life you've been living. The masks, the compromise, the emotional currency you've been paying just to feel accepted. And when a man feels that truth, really feels it, he has two options: keep the peace or reclaim the fire. This is the test of return. It starts with boundaries, with saying no without guilt, with showing up unedited, knowing it might cause friction, knowing that the new version of you might not be as easy to love, but it's more real. And that realness is everything, because you can't lead if you're still asking for permission. She may not like it. People around you may question it. But the man who returns to himself stops reacting to emotion like a servant. He listens. He considers. But he doesn't fold. Because he knows this. The relationship built on a false version of you is a cage. And the only way to find out what's real is to stop performing. You stop chasing harmony and start chasing alignment. The test of return isn't about fixing the relationship. It's about fixing your reflection. And if the relationship can't hold your truth, it was never built to last anyway. The man who returns to himself becomes unpredictable. He becomes centered. And above all, he becomes free. There comes a moment when the silence inside becomes louder than the approval outside. When the man who once compromised everything for connection finally hears what he buried. The call to return, to rebuild, to reclaim what was his before he gave it away, piece by piece. Carl Jung didn't speak of purpose as a goal, it was a psychic necessity. Without it, a man fractures. With it, he heals. But healing doesn't start with others agreeing, it starts with defiance. Quiet, inward, non-negotiable defiance. A refusal to keep folding just to be palatable. Reclaiming the mission means recognizing where you got soft, where you shrank, where you abandoned your path for peace, and not blaming anyone for it. Because strength doesn't come from outrage, it comes from responsibility. You stop asking for emotional permission. You stop checking your ambition against someone else's comfort level. You stop editing your instincts. And you stop playing small just to keep the waters calm. The path forward won't be smooth. It'll cost you things: comfort, convenience, maybe even people. But what you get back is non-negotiable. Your clarity, your drive, your presence. That's not a recovery. That's a resurrection. Purpose doesn't beg to be liked. It commands respect. And the man who reclaims it becomes unstoppable. Not because he's perfect, but because he's aligned. And when you're aligned, nothing external can hold you for long. Every man comes to a crossroads. One path is quiet compliance, emotional stability purchased with the death of direction. The other path? Isolation, discomfort, clarity. The path where you choose mission over mood, truth over peace, self over performance. Carl Jung didn't promise that facing your shadow would be easy. He warned that the cost of ignoring it was far worse. And the shadow of a man who's abandoned his purpose is heavy. It follows him into every room. It makes him irritated, confused, resentful, tired. Because somewhere deep inside, he knows he's not living at full volume. The moment a man chooses his mission again, everything shifts. Not because life gets easier, but because he gets sharper, cleaner, more aligned. He stops seeking emotional approval. He stops filtering his ambition. He stops explaining why he's focused, driven, unavailable for mediocrity. And here's the truth. Some women will walk because they weren't with you. They were with the version of you that bent, the version that was pliable, predictable, emotionally accessible at the cost of purpose. When that version disappears, so does their hold. But the right one. She doesn't need you small to feel safe. She doesn't need you distracted to feel secure. She meets you at the level of your fire, not the limits of your comfort. And if she's not there, you still walk your path. Because your path was never about being understood. It was about being whole. And a man on a mission, unapologetic, aware, and untamed, is the most dangerous force in the world. You don't need to be saved. You need to remember who you are.